想象一下，你现在正站在一个四周都是高墙的雪的里，气温是-20°，你的鞋子早就破了，双脚冻得失去知觉，身边全武装的守卫正拿着枪对你大喊。你肚子饿到发慌，上一顿饭是20个小时前的一碗清汤，里面只有一块剩菜。在这个随时会死去的绝望瞬间，你每天唯一的体力劳动就是用十字镐去挖坚硬的冻土。这时候，你身边的一位同伴突然看着远方的晚霞，轻声对你说：“快看，夕阳好美。”这不是小说情节，这是二战时期纳粹集中营里真实发生过的一幕。很多时候，我们在生活中遇到一点点挫折，比如工作被老板骂，或者跟伴侣吵架，就会觉得人生失去了意义，甚至觉得自己快撑不下去了。我们总以为要过上幸福完美的生活，人生才算有价值。但是这本书给了我们一个极度震撼的重击。它用最残酷的真实场景告诉我们，当一个人被剥夺了所有的财产，失去了尊严，连生死都无法控制的时候，他竟然还能拥有选择自己心态的自由。这集节目要聊的这把刀，不是教你怎么去寻找幸福，而是要带你去看清一个真相，那就是生命的意义从来不是由你向生活去索取什么，而是当生活把最残酷的考验抛给你的时候，你用什么样的姿态去回应它。这本伟大作品的创作者维克多法兰可，他的一生就是这部作品最好的在场证明。法兰可原本是一位在维也纳非常有成就的精神科医生。在二战爆发前夕，他其实已经拿到了美国签证，完全有机会带着妻子逃离那个即将被战火吞噬的地方。可是当他回到家，看到父亲从被毁坏的犹太教堂里捡回来的一块大理石废墟，上面刻着孝敬父母的戒律时，他决定留下来陪他的父母。这个决定直接改变了他的命运。不久后，他们全家被逮捕，被送进了那个让人闻之色变的奥斯威辛集中营。在踏进集中营的那一刻，法兰可藏在衣服衬里里，准备出版的毕生研究手稿被守卫发现并当场烧毁。他所有的社会身份，包括医生、学者、丈夫、儿子，通通在几秒钟之内被剥夺干净。他变成了一个没有名字，只有手臂上刺着一串数字的囚犯。在随后的几年里，他亲眼看着自己的父亲、母亲、哥哥，还有新婚没多久的妻子，一个接一个的在不同的集中营里死去。法兰可自己也无数次在死亡边缘徘徊。可是他为什么非写这本书不可？因为他发现，在那个每天都有人被送进毒气室，每天都有人因为绝望而自杀的修罗场里，最终能活下来的人，往往不是那些身体最健壮的人，而是那些在内心深处依然揣着某种渴望，依然觉得未来有某件事等待自己去完成的人。法兰可在集中营里用偷偷捡来的破纸屑，在黑暗中凭记忆重新拼凑他的手稿。这种对信念的执着，让他把苦难变成了他的实验室。他不再只是一个受害者，他成了最冷静的观察者，去见证人类灵魂在极端状态下到底能爆发出多大的韧性。法兰可在这本书里切下的最锋利的一刀，彻底颠覆了现代人对痛苦和意义的认知。在今天的社会里，我们每天都在谈论如何追求快乐，如何避免痛苦。我们把痛苦当成是一种疾病，当成是人生出了差错的证明。但是法兰可直接戳破了这个幻觉。他指出，人类最核心的驱动力，既不是弗洛伊德说的追求性与快乐的快感原则，也不是阿德勒说的追求权利和得位的优越感，而是对意义的追求。这被他称为意志的意义。在集中营的日常里，有一种非常残酷的现象，守卫会定期进行筛选，把那些身体虚弱，看起来无法再劳动的人挑出来，直接送进毒气室。每到这个时候，所有人都在经历精神上的极度折磨。法兰可观察到，囚犯的心理变化通常会经历3个阶段。第一阶段是刚进营时的极度震惊与恐惧，他们无法相信眼前的现实。第二阶段是入住一段时间后的冷漠。这种冷漠其实是大脑的一种自我防御机制，因为如果每天都为身边死去的同伴悲伤，人的精神在1秒钟之内就会崩溃。所以他们封闭了自己的情感，对周围的死亡和暴行视若无睹。然而， 最可怕的是第3阶段，法兰可称之为精神的死亡。那是一个极具画面感但也让人心碎的场景。在集中营里，香烟是非常珍贵的货币，可以用来换取救命的稀汤。如果一个囚犯在某天早上突然不把香烟拿去换食物，而是自己点燃把它抽掉，身边的所有人就会知道，这个人已经放弃了。因为他不再相信自己能看到明天，他放弃了未来的希望。而法兰可惊人的发现，通常在抽完香烟后的48小时之内，这个人就会因为免疫系统全面崩溃而死在床上。这把刀最锋利的地方就在这里。真正杀死那些囚犯的，往往不是饥饿和寒冷，而是他们在内心深处对生命意义的缴械投降。这让我们不得不重新看待我们的日常。法兰可大声地告诉我们，在任何极端的环境下，人类都拥有一种无法被夺走的自由，那就是选择自己面对苦难的心态。你可以选择像个懦夫一样在苦难中沉沦，你也可以选择像个尊贵的人一样，带着尊严去承受这个苦难。法兰可讲述了一个故事。有一次，一名前辈在黑暗的营房里对着所有绝望的囚犯讲话。他说，此时此刻，在我们看不见的天空之上，或许正有一位已经逝去的挚爱，或者有一位神灵，正俯瞰着我们。他对我们的期望，不是希望我们在这个地方痛哭流涕，互相践踏，而是希望我们不要辜负自己正在承受的苦难。这句话让无数人在黑暗中重新坐直了身子。承受苦难，竟然可以成为一种成就。这把刀切开了我们平庸的借口。我们总是在抱怨环境不好，景气不好，老板太坏，我们把自己的不快乐完全归咎于外在世界。但这本书用最极端的集中营经历证明了，外在环境只能折磨你的肉体，除非你点头同意，否则没有人能决定你灵魂的姿态。当这本书的观点与我自己的生命经验碰撞时，坦白说，我的内心激起了巨大的涟漪，甚至带有一种非常诚实的不舒服。我非常认同法兰可说的，人必须为自己找到一个为什么活着的理由，才能承受任何怎么活着的考验。在我的日常创作者生活和投资实战中，我也无数次体会到，当你心里有一个清晰的长期愿景时，眼前的短期波动，市场的暴跌，或者点阅率的起伏，真的都只是沿途的尘埃，根本无法动摇你。这本书在我的生命观里照亮了一大片盲区，它让我意识到，我们平时自以为是的那些压力、焦虑，在真正的命运巨浪面前，是多么的微不足道。但是，当我合上书本，在深夜里反复思索时，我必须诚实地说，我对法兰可提出的某些高标准要求，感到有一种隐隐的抗拒与不完全认同。法兰可的意义治疗法，在某种程度上把人的自主意识抬到了一个近乎神圣、完美的高度。他要求我们在面对最惨烈的遭遇时，依然要保持精神上的绝对清醒和高尚。可是作为一个普通人，我常常在想，当一个人的肉体和精神被折磨到极限，当他亲眼看到自己的孩子在面前死去时，我们真的能苛求他去展现神魔高尚的灵魂姿态吗？那种冷漠、崩溃，甚至暂时的歇斯底里，难道不也是人类最真实、最需要被理解和接纳的本能吗？如果过度强调这种在苦难中寻找意义的标准，会不会变成另一种变相的精神暴力，让那些正在经历巨大创伤、暂时站不起来的人，产生更深的自我谴责，觉得自己是不是不够坚强，是不是辜负了苦难？我觉得，承认自己的脆弱，允许自己有一段时间坐在地上痛哭，甚至觉得人生在某个当下就是毫无意义的，这也是一种活着的权利。我们不需要每时每刻都当一个完美的精神英雄。这集节目聊到这里，我不想给你列出一张如何寻找人生意义的清单，因为那样做太廉价了。我只想请你带走一件事，这是一个可以在你今晚洗澡，或者明天走路时，放进口袋里继续想的问题。请你试着问自己，如果把你现在生活中所有用来定义你价值的东西，你的工作职称，你的存款数字，你的名牌包包，甚至你在社群媒体上的头衔，通通像法兰可在集中营里那样，在几秒钟之内被剥夺干净。这时候，脱掉所有外在包装的你， 内心深处还剩下什么，是真正让你非活下去不可的理由。Imagine you are standing in a snow-covered courtyard completely surrounded by towering concrete walls. The temperature has plummeted to -20 degrees. Your shoes are torn and completely useless, leaving your feet entirely numb to the frozen ground. Fully armed guards are hovering over you, screaming orders with their weapons drawn. Your stomach is completely empty, gnawing at you because your last meal was over 20 hours ago, and it consisted of nothing more than a bowl of dirty water with a single scrap of leftover vegetable. In this horrifying and unpredictable test of survival, your only task for the day is to swing a heavy pickaxe repeatedly into the solid frozen earth. Right at that exact moment, a prisoner next to you glances at the distant horizon, nudges your shoulder, and whispers for you to look at how beautiful the sunset is. This is not a scene from a fictional movie. This was a real moment that happened inside a Nazi concentration camp during the Second World War. So often in our modern daily lives, we face minor setbacks and immediately feel completely overwhelmed. A sharp criticism from a manager at the office or a heated argument with a romantic partner can make us feel like our world is ending, leaving us convinced that we cannot handle the pressure. We live under the comforting illusion that our lives must be completely smooth and perfect in order to have real value and happiness. However, the masterpiece we are exploring today delivers a massive shock to that fragile mindset. It uses the most brutal historical realities to demonstrate that even when an individual is stripped of all material possessions, robbed of their basic human dignity, and forced to face the constant threat of unpredictable death, they still retain one ultimate power. They retain the ultimate spiritual freedom to choose their own attitude in any given set of circumstances. The powerful conceptual weapon we are uncovering in this session is not a guide on how to chase superficial happiness. Instead, it is a tool to help you see a profound truth. The ultimate meaning of your life is never about what you can demand or expect from the world. It is entirely about how you choose to stand and respond when life throws its most ruthless and agonizing tests directly at your feet. The incredible creator behind this timeless work was Viktor Frankl, and his entire life serves as the most authentic and undeniable proof of his philosophy. Before the outbreak of the Second World War, Frankl was already a highly accomplished and respected psychiatrist operating in the city of Vienna. As the Nazi threat grew closer, he actually managed to secure an official immigration visa to the United States. He had a golden opportunity to pack his bags and escape across the ocean with his young wife, completely avoiding the approaching catastrophe. Yet, on the very day he needed to make his final decision, he returned to his parents' home and noticed a piece of marble resting on the table. His father had rescued it from a local synagogue that had been destroyed by Nazi forces. Carved onto that fragment of stone was a single commandment, the biblical instruction to honor your father and your mother. Looking at that stone, Frankl made a choice that completely sealed his fate. He chose to let his American visa expire so he could stay and protect his aging parents. Shortly after that decision, his entire family was arrested by the authorities and loaded onto trains headed for the notorious concentration camps, including the death factory known as Auschwitz. The moment Frankl marched through the iron gates of the camp, his entire existence was violently dismantled. He had smuggled a completed academic manuscript hidden inside the lining of his coat, representing his entire life work as a scientist. A guard discovered it within minutes and tossed it into the fire without a second thought. In less than 60 seconds, every single layer of his identity was completely erased. He was no longer a doctor, no longer an author, no longer a husband, and no longer a son. He was transformed into a nameless entity, identified solely by a string of identification digits tattooed permanently onto the skin of his left arm. Over the course of the next 3 years, he was forced to watch his father, his mother, his brother, and his pregnant wife perish one by one in different camps across Europe. Frankl himself survived typhus and came face to face with death on countless occasions. Why did he feel an absolute structural necessity to write this text after surviving such horror? He wrote it because he noticed a striking psychological pattern among the prisoners. In that living hell where hundreds were sent to the gas chambers every single day and many chose to commit suicide by running into the electrified fences, the individuals who managed to stay alive were not necessarily the physically strongest. The survivors were almost always the individuals who still held on to a specific vision of the future, a deep conviction that there was a task or a loved one waiting for them on the outside. Frankl survived by using discarded scraps of paper to reconstruct his lost manuscript in total darkness. He turned his immense suffering into a profound psychological laboratory. He refused to view himself merely as a helpless victim. Instead, he chose to become an objective observer, documenting the exact mechanisms that allow the human soul to maintain its resilience when everything else is gone. The sharpest conceptual weapon Frankl introduces in this text completely shatters how modern society views suffering and human purpose. In our contemporary culture, we are constantly bombarded with messages instructing us to maximize pleasure and eliminate discomfort. We treat emotional pain as if it were a medical pathology, a definitive sign that our lives have somehow failed. Frankl tears down this illusion. He argues that the primary motivational force inside a human being is neither the pursuit of physical pleasure as Sigmund Freud suggested, nor the drive for power and social status as Alfred Adler claimed. The most fundamental drive is what Frankl terms the will to meaning, the deep-seated necessity to find a reason for your existence. During his time in the camps, Frankl analyzed the psychological deterioration of the prisoners, noting that they generally progressed through three distinct phases. The first phase occurred immediately upon arrival, characterized by absolute shock, denial, and consuming horror. The prisoners simply could not comprehend the sheer scale of the brutality around them. The second phase was a transition into deep emotional apathy. This apathy was actually a necessary psychological defense mechanism developed by the brain. If a prisoner allowed himself to feel intense grief every time a companion was beaten or murdered, his mind would collapse within hours. Therefore, they systematically turned off their emotions, becoming completely numb to the sight of dead bodies and daily violence. However, the most dangerous phase was the final stage, which Frankl identified as the death of the spirit. This phase manifested in a highly specific and heartbreaking manner within the camp ecosystem. In the daily reality of the camp, cigarettes were treated as an extremely valuable currency, which prisoners could trade with guards for a bowl of life-saving soup. If a prisoner suddenly refused to trade his cigarettes and instead sat down in a corner to smoke them all himself, everyone in the barracks knew that he had given up. He had reached a point where he no longer believed he would see tomorrow, and he had completely severed his connection to any future hope. Frankl made the terrifying medical observation that in almost every instance, within 48 hours of smoking those cigarettes, the individual would pass away in his bunk because his immune system had completely shut down. This is the exact spot where Frankl cuts deepest. The ultimate cause of death for those individuals was not merely the physical starvation or the freezing weather. They died because they had surrendered their inner will to meaning. This realization forces us to take a long, hard look at our own daily lives. Frankl declares to the world that no matter how restrictive or terrifying your external environment becomes, you always retain one fundamental human freedom that can never be stolen by any tyrant or any circumstance. That is the freedom to choose your own spiritual attitude. You can choose to let the hardships of life break you, reducing you to a bitter and hollow shell, or you can choose to bear your difficulties with immense dignity, transforming your pain into an act of profound courage. Frankl shares a moving account of a senior prisoner who stood up in a pitch-black barracks one evening to comfort his starving companions. He reminded them that at that very second, high above the clouds where no guard could reach, a deceased loved one or a higher power was looking down at them. He explained that this observer did not want to see them groveling, weeping, or treating each other with cruelty. Instead, that observer expected them to suffer distinguishedly, ensuring that their pain was not a useless waste of human potential. To hear that suffering itself could be turned into a profound human achievement completely strips away our everyday excuses. We spend so much time complaining about a bad economy, a difficult manager, or an unexpected twist in our personal relationships, blaming our unhappiness entirely on the world around us. This book proves that while the external world has the power to inflict pain on your physical body, it can never dictate the posture of your soul unless you give it your explicit permission. When I allow Frankl thoughts to collide directly with my own life journey as an investor and a content creator, I have to admit that it triggers a massive internal wave, bringing up a very honest sense of discomfort. I completely agree with his core premise that an individual who possesses a clear why to live can endure almost anyhow. In my own daily experience managing high-stakes investments and navigating the unpredictable landscape of digital production, I have seen firsthand that when you hold a deep, unshakable vision of your long-term purpose, the daily volatility means absolutely nothing. Market crashes, sudden drops in performance, and temporary setbacks become nothing more than dust on the road, completely incapable of altering your trajectory. This philosophy illuminates a major blind spot in modern life, making us realize that the stresses and anxieties we obsess over are completely trivial compared to the genuine storms of human fate. Yet, as I sit alone in the quiet hours of the night reflecting on these pages, I must be entirely candid about my resistance to some of Frankl's extreme demands. His framework places human consciousness on an almost impossibly sacred and flawless pedestal. He demands that even when a person is subjected to the most horrific atrocities imaginable, they must maintain absolute mental clarity and moral nobility. As an ordinary human being, I find myself questioning this standard. When an individual body and mind are pushed past the absolute breaking point, or when a parent is forced to witness the death of their child, can we truly demand that they display spiritual greatness? Isn't that state of numbness, emotional collapse, or temporary hysteria a deeply authentic piece of human nature that deserves absolute compassion rather than philosophical lecturing? If we push this idea of finding meaning in every tragedy too far, it risks becoming a form of unintended psychological cruelty. It can create an additional layer of guilt for individuals who are currently trapped in deep trauma and simply cannot find the strength to stand up. It might make them feel as though they are failing because they cannot find a beautiful lesson in their pain. I believe that accepting your own vulnerability, allowing yourself to sit on the ground and weep uncontrollably, and admitting that life feels completely meaningless in a dark moment is also a fundamental human right. We do not need to be flawless spiritual heroes every single second of our lives. As we bring this deep dive to a close, I have no intention of providing you with a cheap, step-by-step checklist on how to discover your purpose. Instead, I want you to take away just one single thing, a question that you can carry in your pocket to think about while you are walking tomorrow or taking a quiet moment for yourself. Ask yourself this. If everything that currently defines your status and value in the modern world were suddenly vanished, your professional job title, your bank account balance, your material possessions, and every single follower or title you hold on social platforms, if all of that were stripped away in a matter of seconds just like it was for Frankl, who are you underneath the armor? And what is the real reason that would make you choose to keep pushing forward?